Ilia Topuria is now the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, according to the updated UFC rankings. Also, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett blasts Charles Oliveira and his game plan. Like, what type of game plan was that? Of course, we're going to get into that topic. Tracy Cortez downs President Donald Trump. And also, is MMA in decline? Even though the UFC is booming? A big article today by Yahoo Sports. We'll get into that topic as well, and much, much more next.
Broadcasting live from an undisclosed location. This is the TCMMA podcast with your host, Chris Cross.
Whoa!
Dana White privilege.
Let's go, baby! Let's go! Let's go! Let's go! Let's go, baby!
Dana White privilege. Privilege. Privilege.
What up, what up? This is your boy Chris Cross checking in. This is the TC MMA podcast, and we got a lot of topics to discuss, especially with UFC 317 in the rear view. We got to get into Ilia Topuria's new pound-for-pound status as #1 in the world. Islam Makhachev got pushed down the list. Also, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett blasts Charles Oliveira. Right, we're going to get into these topics in a moment, but first I want to get into a big article today from Yahoo Sports, and this article is titled "UFC is booming, but MMA collapsing around it?" Question mark. The data is concerning, and what the data shows is real simple. There's less MMA professional fights around the world. That's it. Meanwhile, the UFC is more popular than ever before. So, as fans, what it comes down to is, should we be concerned that MMA is in decline? Maybe not MMA, but the amount of fights that are happening every year. Let's just say in 2020 or 2019, for example, there were 8,000 MMA fights. Not exact, just using a reference. And now there's 5,000 or 6,000 professional MMA fights per year. Is that a bad thing? Well, according to this article, it doesn't look good. Okay? But the truth is this happens to a lot of sports. And we can get into the lawsuits the UFC faces and things of that nature. But when you do a quick search, it doesn't take long to find out that other sports have gone through this as well. And, football, for example, the AFL and NFL merger in 1970, forming the current NFL. Prior to this, the AFL and NFL were separate, competing leagues, according to AI, right? There have been other leagues that attempted to challenge the NFL, such as the World Football League, USFL, AAFC. And right now you got smaller leagues like the UFL from the merger of XFL and USFL. All right, so this is nothing new in terms of sports. There's clearly not as many professional football games as there would have been when there's, 6 different leagues going on. When a sport is regionalized, there's going to be a bunch of different fights in those regions. People are paying attention more to the regional circuits because you don't really know who the best fighter is. If you got multiple regions, say you got 10 different regions throughout the world doing MMA, and you have 10 lightweight champions. Well, who's the champ? We don't know. So we're watching. You have to watch. But now the UFC has rised to the top, like the NFL. Now, of course, there's all these lawsuits going down. In terms of the UFC, more or less looking like a monopoly, just to kind of centralize the whole argument of what's going on. And, I mean, isn't that what you want as a fan? Do you want to be like boxing? 15, 20 years ago, and you can make the case even right now, to where you have multiple promotions. Again, we've discussed this at length before. You don't know who the real champions are. There's multiple champions, things of that nature. Or do you want one UFC in terms of MMA, so you know, okay, we know right now that Ilia Topuria is the best featherweight and lightweight in the world. Well, maybe Islam could take him, right? But I'm just saying, outside the UFC, there's not another lightweight that would even come close. So therefore, what I'm saying is the average fan is no longer paying attention as much to regional circuits. Fighters too know, okay, I got to go through this avenue. There might be a couple, what it's going to turn into, in my opinion, is a bunch of minor leagues, right? Like minor league baseball. Now that's tied in directly with MLB. It might not be tied in directly with UFC. I mean, it could happen. But you're going to have other promotions that become the minor leagues, meaning you got to go through this to get to the UFC, to maybe get to the Contender Series, and then to get a contract with the UFC. Now, it remains to be seen if the UFC is going to pay a heavy price for doing this. But I think you could easily make the argument that the NFL is a monopoly, the NBA is a monopoly, okay? A lot of other areas. Now, there are some sports that don't really have a monopoly, right? Like soccer. There's so many soccer leagues throughout the world that it's anyone's guess who the best team is. The only taste we get of the best team is when countries come together and play in the World Cup, right? Once every 4 years. But we don't know who the best individual team in the world is. And maybe I'm going out on a limb here, right? Because I don't want to act like I know everything about soccer. I know a lot about the World Cup, but soccer, you know, I talk to this one guy not every day, but every couple days when I see him, when I go in a certain store, and he's got soccer games throughout the world on. So he would probably challenge me on this topic because he knows a lot more. But I'm just making the case that we don't want a bunch of regional MMA promotions with no centralized unit at the top to where we know who the champions are. So now that the UFC is growing larger and larger and larger, that's why I'm saying the UFC is booming, but MMA, at least fights, the amount of them per year, is in decline. To me, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Now, when these lawsuits go to court, maybe, the UFC loses. They've already lost one, or at least had to settle. But I think if you're the UFC and you're playing the long game, settling is not a bad idea, because you're getting to the point now where you don't need to do what you did in the past as much, because now everybody wants to get to the UFC. You've established yourself. Other promotions have bit the dust in trying to challenge the UFC. Right? It's not going to happen unless there's an intervention from the courts. And hopefully there's not. Because I personally stopped watching boxing because I don't know who the champ is. Especially when these promotions don't want to let their best fighter fight another promotion's best fighter because they can't agree. Right? There's no central body. So we don't want the UFC to head there. So finally what I'm saying is that it's not a bad thing that MMA fights are in decline. And it's a good thing that the UFC is booming, because we now have a clear angle, if you're a fighter, on what you got to do to get to the top. And some of these lower level fight leagues will still grow, but without eyeballs on these fights, these promotions cannot survive. That's the bottom line. And they don't need to survive. A few of them will, and that's where fighters will go to test out their professional skills. And if they do well, they'll get into the UFC. In other sports like football and basketball, you got college for that. MMA is not a college sport or high school sport where there's a clear path to becoming a professional or draft or anything like that. So everybody calm down. MMA fights as a whole might be in decline, but the future of the sport is strong and healthy. That's my take. All right, moving on. Ilia Topuria in the new UFC rankings has proved to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world right now. Okay? And understand what the pound-for-pound rankings are different than our dude list, right? Our dude list has an aspect of who my favorite fighters are, things of that nature, but it also has an aspect of looking to the future. The pound-for-pound list is a list that's in the past, even though one would think that it's currently today. No, it's what have you done for me lately. Lately is still in the past, right? This is why a guy like Hamza Chimaev is number 14 on the pound-for-pound list. Even though, in my view, looking forward, he's the best fighter in the world. He's still got some proving to do, but to me, he's the best fighter in the world. I always want to make sure I explain the dude list for those of you that follow it. But in terms of what the UFC rankings are, pound for pound, that's what it is. You got Topuria at 1, Makhachev at 2. I'm looking at the lightweight, which is basically almost the same. That's how good the lightweight division is. Topuria, Makhachev, Merab Dvalishvili. That makes sense. Dricus du Plessis, Alexandre Pantoja, Volkanovski, Ankalaev, and the list goes on and on. But that's the big story in terms of the rankings, is that Topuria is number 1. Now, when you look at what's coming next, you see a guy like Joshua Van catapulted all the way to number 1 in the flyweight rankings. We discussed this live on the podcast during UFC 317. How high will Van go? He'll be 1, 2, or 3, and I'm glad that they put him at 1. He deserves it. Is he ready for the title fight? I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. Pantoja seems like he's on a different level. Merab on a different level. Who knows who he's going to fight next? Volkanovski is going to have some challenges in the featherweight division. Movsar Evloev went up 2 spots today, despite not even fighting. So they're already starting to push him forward. And of course, Holloway's 1, but he's moving up the lightweight for the, in the near term. Topuria won the belt. They still got Makhachev at 2, but he's likely going to welterweight. That's a fight that everyone's talking about. Sarukian is right behind Islam. And then you got to go down a ways before you get to Paddy the Batty Pimblett, who's ranked number 10. And he went on a tear on Charles Oliveira, calling him out and saying, more or less, what was the game plan here? I don't think there's a game plan against Topuria. Or maybe there was, but it didn't even have a chance to play out. When you get beat in 2 minutes, it's hard to say that there was game plan worked or it didn't. We don't know. Obviously, on some level, it didn't work because you got finished, but you didn't even get a chance to execute the game plan. That's called disruption. That's what Topuria did to Oliveira. And I'm still surprised at the way it finished. We shouldn't be looking back, but man, especially at the time, it was surprising. But Paddy Pimblett sitting at number 10, making some noise. He walked right in the octagon after the fight, which Dana White said shouldn't have happened. And you never know. This stuff sometimes is like WWE. I believe the fights are 100% real. But like the WWE, they're staging something for the future, right? It's almost like whoever wins that fight, we know that Sarukian is really next in line, but I don't believe the UFC wants Sarukian to be next in line. So it's like Paddy will be there live, so let's just march Paddy out, right? And he's number 10, but you can make the case that maybe he should get an opportunity because, look at the names up there. Oliveira beat. Sarukian can't make weight. Gaethje has been getting beat. Holloway, we're going to find out against Poirier. If Holloway wins that fight, even though he got beat by Topuria, suddenly maybe it's a different story at lightweight. I doubt it, but he's a different fighter. Then you got Poirier, who's retiring. Dan Hooker, who we haven't seen in some time, who's talking about fighting Sarukian. So we can go on and on about the lightweight division, right? We could spend 2 hours on this division. That's how good it is. But we got to move on. JDM, Jack Della Maddalena, welterweight champ. Who's next there? Should be Islam if he wants it, right? But you also got Shavkat in the mix. How's that going to play out? Middleweight, we all know what's coming at 319. Duplessis and Chimaev, fight of the decade for me. Ankalaev is probably going to have to fight Pereira once again. And then Tom Aspinall, who's he fighting? Right? Cyril Gane? Alexander Volkov? I mean, who? This guy could be champion for a while if John Jones stays away. And then on the women's side, I mean, you got the regular names, Zhang Weili, Valentina Shevchenko, Amanda Nunes is coming back. We could very easily have the same three champions as we had 3, 4, 5 years ago. It seems like as these three continue to hold the top spots. So the women's divisions are very top heavy, and it seems like when the women, are between 35 and 37, they're at their peak. They last a little longer, unlike the men. But that's just where it stands. Also, Tracy Cortez went off on what seemingly was against President Donald Trump and his policies, saying first in English, I'm going to say it in Spanish, because if you know, you know, right? This is at the following the fight at UFC on the mic, live, said in Spanish. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about this topic. Of course, this is being translated, but there are a lot of ugly things going on with the whole race around the United States. And I want to tell them that if they need a voice, that here I am, and that I hope to make all the Mexicans here proud. And of course, there's a lot of Mexicans that are going to back that. There's some that are going to be against it. So, I mean, it is what it is. But, to come into America and go after the president is quite honestly highly interesting. So we did a quick research. You know how easy it is nowadays to do research. And we're like, okay, if you're going to bang up America, fine. But what does Mexico do? Well, here's what Mexico does. They have various laws and policies regarding illegal immigration, which aim to regulate entry, stay, and exit of individuals in the country. Penalties, deportation. Okay? So it seems like Mexico deports illegal immigrants as well. Right? Illegal entry. Crossing the border illegally can be considered a felony. And illegal entry can result in fines and imprisonment, with subsequent offenses and re-entry after deportation carrying harsher penalties. All right, and the list goes on and on. So what it seems like to me is it's not much different. It just seems like what's happening now is we're following the law, right? Which some people have a problem with. And I'm not going to get too deep into the politics and all that, but Tracy Cortez decided to make a statement, and it needs to be discussed. Because we don't like it when our country starts telling another country what to do, and what we're telling them to do is in contradiction to what we do. You lose all legitimacy. Now, if Mexico had wide open borders and they were just letting everybody in, and they weren't deporting anybody and wasn't putting anyone in prison or giving them a felony, then we wouldn't have, then you know what? You got some legitimacy. But when that country is doing the same thing and you're coming out against the United States, it's like you lose all legitimacy. Okay? And it's funny, now that Trump is following the law, people are getting up in arms. And in this case, a UFC fighter, or else we wouldn't even be responding to it. So you got to get Mexico straight before you come after America, if you're going to reference the race and the heritage and all those things. It seems that that country isn't much different than our own. In fact, there's not a lot of countries that just have wide open borders and say, hey, everybody come on in. There are some countries trying that. It's not going too well. I can tell you that right now. But who knows how this thing will play out in the future. So these are the topics being discussed today. We're still unwinding from this past Saturday at UFC 317. I'm sure you can see, those of you that follow the podcast pretty regularly can see that the background has changed. I mean, we came in here on Sunday. Remember, we're dead tired because we're up till 2 or 3, going crazy on Saturday night for the pay-per-view and all that. And then, breaking up all that footage after the fact and staying up even later. And we come out here to the studio and just said, hey, you know what? We need to revamp this whole thing. And that's what we did. And here in a few days, we'll kind of show you all what it looks like. It's just going to make the future live streams for the live UFC events even better. And we're excited about that. We're not fully done yet. I got my little space kind of done. Still got to probably add and do some things, but for right now, it's good. And you'll see at the next live event, as we have a guest, what it looks like and how it's coming together. But for now, this is what it is. This is your boy Chris Cross. I hope you have a great day, and God bless. As always, peace.